What if I told you I completely misjudged one of the Marvel commanders, thinking it was just another boring Voltron commander, but in reality it's one of the most unique control decks that I've ever built. The mighty Thor, Jane Foster. For just 3 mana in Azorius colors we get a 3/3 flying human god hero that I genuinely believe is one of the most underrated cards in the entire Marvel set. It's finally time for Brago to move over as the king of Azorius Blink because we just got ourselves a new queen. Whenever Jane attacks we get to blink up to 1 target non-token artifact or creature, meaning that it will get exiled and then immediately return to the battlefield tapped. And this little ability basically allows us to repeatedly blink any sort of creature or artifact with a valuable enter the battlefield trigger and get another use out of it every single combat. You want more card draw? Just blink your Herbie Scout unit. Need removal? Just blink your Lauren of the 3rd Path. Or if you just want to absolutely decimate your opponent's boards, just blink your Portal to Phyrexia and all of your opponents will have to sacrifice 3 more creatures whenever you do so. And because Jane does come down really early on turn 3 and she does have flying, it is surprisingly easy to swing her at our opponents, giving us access to an incredibly reliable blink engine sitting right there in the command zone. Now while that's already incredibly powerful, what really breaks this commander and totally changes how we approach building this deck is her second ability. That simply whenever any sort of equipment enters a battlefield under our control will allow us to draw a card. Suddenly all of those little utility equipment pieces that feel pretty mediocre in most decks turn into cantrips by replacing themselves whenever we play them, and they will keep our hand full. Now what makes Jane into this ridiculous of a commander is that her blink ability doesn't only work on creatures. It can also target artifacts, meaning every single combat we just get to blink one of our equipments, make it re-enter again, and whenever we do so Jane will just reward us with an additional card. Now I know, blinking your equipment does sound pretty horrible. After all, whenever it leaves the battlefield and enters again, it just falls off your creature and you will have to re-equip it again. Now while you might think that's a downside, this deck was built to abuse exactly that. Cards with the 4 Mirrodin mechanic will just create you another 2/2 creature token whenever you blink them and reattach themselves. Whenever you blink your mythical code, it will just auto-equip to any legendary creature you control by itself, and even a silly little equipment like a gold pen will just generate you an additional treasure token whenever you blink it. And keep in mind, outside all of the value these equipments produce whenever they enter the battlefield, you will also get to draw a card of Jane's second ability, which honestly is just kinda absurd. Now I must admit, normally I'm not that big of a fan of equipment decks. In fact, Voltron might just be my least favorite archetype in Commander. But this doesn't feel like a Voltron deck at all, and not even a dedicated blink shell either. Instead, it feels like this incredibly unique Azorius equipment control deck. We'll spend the early game deploying some cheap equipment or some high value enter the battlefield creatures, then resolve Jane on turn 3, and from that point on every combat step will just draw us more cards and generate us more ETB blink value. While at the same time this entire strategy is backed up by a really heavy control shell with a ton of counter magic, bounce effects, and one-sided board wipes that will allow us to just slowly grind out the entire table while Jane turns into a really scary equipment carrier that will just threaten opponents on commander damage. And let me tell you, I'm just absolutely in love with this deck. If you're looking for a commander that feels totally different than any other Azorius option out there, and that really rewards smart sequencing and resource management, you're absolutely going to love this one. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up into 6 categories: the equipment, the blink package, synergies and payoffs, acceleration, protection and interaction, and the lands. And let's start with what Jane is all about. equipment. Now while there are more equipment spread throughout the other categories, this is where most of them are. And unlike traditional equipment decks, these cards aren't just in the list to make Jane bigger. That's honestly just a nice little bonus. Many of these equipments will generate you value whenever they enter the battlefield, synergize perfectly with our blink strategy, or have powerful effects whenever Jane does deal combat damage to an opponent, which is exactly what we want to be doing anyways. Bloodforged Battle Axe, a little 1-mana equipment that will give the equipped creature a +2 power boost, and whenever the equipped creature does deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to create a copy out of the axe. And let me tell you, this little card gets absolutely out of control whenever you do combine it with Jane, because whenever you do have your commander on the battlefield and you play this card, it will already replace itself as a cantrip. Then on a later turn you can just attach it to Jane, swing with her, and you will get to generate another copy of our battle axe, which will draw you yet another card. On the next turn you can then swing with Jane and 2 axes and draw 2 cards, then 4, then 8, and this thing just goes absolutely nuts. Now while obviously you will still have to pay the 2 generic mana for each axe to get them equipped onto Jane, as you will see later in the video, we do have a ton of ways to actually bypass those equip costs. Lava Spur Boots, another 1-mana equipment that will give the equipped creature both Ward 1 and Haste. The Ward will make it less efficient for your opponents to target whatever this thing is equipped to with any sort of spot removal or ability, while at the same time also being a fantastic haste enabler that will allow you to swing with Jane instantly from the turn she comes down and instantly get a use out of her blink ability. Now you might be wondering why I decided to include this pair of boots over the classic Lightning Greaves, which only has an equip cost of 0. And the reason honestly is very simple, because Lightning Greaves will give the equipped creature Shroud, which will make the equipped creature untargetable by any sort of spell or ability from any player, but that is pretty horrible in an equipment deck, because equipping a card to a creature is actually a targeted ability and we won't be able to attach any other equipment to that creature anymore. Glimmerlance, a 2-mana equipment with a 4 Mirrodin mechanic, meaning that whenever it enters the battlefield you get to create a 2/2 rebel token and this equipment will automatically attach to it. And whenever any creature equipped with a Glimmerlance does attack with at least one other creature, we get to draw a card of it. And a really cool thing you can do is that whenever you have your Glimmerlance and Jane on the battlefield, you can just swing with a token and Jane, then decide to resolve the trigger of the Glimmerlance first and just draw a card. Then you can resolve Jane's blink trigger and just blink your Glimmerlance, which will draw you yet another card because you have an equipment entering with Jane on the battlefield. And on top of that you will get to generate another 2/2 creature token you can use as a chump blocker on a later turn. Lion Sash, a 2-mana equipment cat, and this thing comes with a reconfigure mechanic, meaning that whenever you cast it, it will enter the battlefield as a creature, and for 2 generic mana you can equip it to any other creature you control. And no matter if this thing is just on the battlefield as a creature or it's equipped to any of your other bodies, you will still be able to use its activated ability, that for just 1 white mana will allow you to exile any card from a graveyard on instant speed, and if the exiled card was a permanent, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto this card. Now, as most of you know, almost any deck in the Commander format does rely on using their graveyard in some way, and this little effect can actually win you games. Be it you just exiling lands from a Necrobloom player's graveyard that's about to juggle them in and out to get a ton of Field of the Dead triggers. You can use this ability on any sort of reanimation deck that's about to get their Elesh Norn from their grave to the battlefield, or even if you are playing against a Spellslinger player, you can just strip their graveyard of any useful cards whenever they are going for an Underworld Breach turn. While at the same time, this card will just keep stacking more and more counters, which is really nice because whenever this thing is equipped to a creature, it will get +1/+1 for each counter on this equipment, making it both function as a really solid graveyard disruption tool that later in the game can be used as a win condition. And we're also playing Cloud's Favor favorite weapon, Buster Sword, which for some weird reason isn't even legendary. It's a 3-mana equipment that will give a +3/+2 stat boost, and whenever the equipped creature does deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to draw a card. After that has happened, we get to cast any spell from our hand with mana value equal or less than the amount of damage that the creature dealt for absolutely free. And while this thing doesn't have any sort of synergy with our Blink game plan, the value it will generate whenever you do get it attached to Jane is just incredible. Because thanks to Jane's base 3/3 stat line, whenever you do have the sword on her, she will swing for at least 6 damage, and thanks to her flying, it will be really easy to connect to your opponents and get the trigger out of this thing. Now, since this is such a strong and potent ability, it does come with quite a hefty price tag. If you do want to keep the deck a little more budget friendly, you can totally replace it with a Vibranium Strike Gauntlet, which is a 4-mana equipment that whenever you play it will auto-attach to any creature you control. It will give it a +3 power boost, trample, and whenever it does deal combat damage to an opponent, you get to draw a card of it. Pre-War Formal Wear, a 3-mana equipment that whenever it enters will allow us to pick any creature with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard, return it straight to the battlefield, and then attach this equipment to it. And this thing is just the perfect addition to our equipment toolbox strategy that we're going for with this deck. You can use it to get back any of your low-cost value creatures, and my favorite thing to do with this is that whenever your opponents do manage to remove Jane, you can just make her go to the graveyard instead of the command zone, and whenever you now play this card, you will be able to get her back on the battlefield for just 3 mana, bypassing any sort of commander decks. And the best thing about this card is that its effect is an ETB ability, meaning we can use Jane's attack trigger or any of our other Blink engines to just flicker this over and over again, and every time we do so, we will get another creature back. Sword of Heart and Home, a 3-mana equipment that will give the equipped creature a +2/+2 stat boost and protection from both green and white. And those colors are actually quite relevant because a ton of spot removal is printed in those colors. Either be it a Path to Exile or a Swords to Plowshares in white, or some specific flying creature hate printed in green like a POW patch formation. Now obviously, like all of the swords in the cycle, this thing also comes with a combat damage trigger. Whenever the equipped creature does connect, you get to pick one creature you control and exile it. Then you get to search your library for a basic land card and also put it into exile. And then you get to put both of the exiled cards straight onto the battlefield, giving us access to yet another Blink engine we can use on any of our value creatures, which sadly we can't use on any of our artifacts. And also a crazy acceleration tool that will just fetch us up another land every single turn we connect, which is pretty crazy, especially considering we are in Azorius colors. Assassin's Gauntlet. Whenever this equipment enters the battlefield, it will auto-attach to any creature you control, and you get to pick one opponent and tap all creatures they have on the battlefield. The equipped creature will also get a +1/+1 stat boost, and whenever it does deal combat damage to an opponent, it will allow you to draw a card and then discard a card. You can use this effect to tap down any sort of flyers to make sure we can get combat damage through with our Jane. You can use this in a political way and just tap down one specific opponent's board, making it really easy for your other 2 opponents to actually connect to that player. And the looting effect will allow us to dig even deeper into our deck, and we can even discard some value creatures which we can get back later by just blinking our pre-war Formal Wear. Now, while this effect might seem pretty underwhelming by itself, the main reason it's included is for its 2-card synergy with the next card, Mjolnir, Storm's Hammer. After all, this is a Thor deck, so we just had to include her legendary hammer. And I'm not talking about the new red one we got in the Marvel set, but the original one. It's a 4-mana, obviously legendary equipment that whenever it enters the battlefield will auto-equip to any legendary creature, giving us immediate value whenever we play it, and also making it into the perfect Blink target for Jane. And whenever the equipped creature does attack, we get to pick one creature defending player does control tap it, and then put a stun counter on it. Damage Mjolnir will deal damage to each opponent for every tapped creature that the defending player does control. Now already by itself, this ability will already give you an incredible layer of additional table-wide pressure on all of your opponents. Because let's say one of your opponents just swung at you with like 5 creatures and they're now tapped, you can now just swing back at them with your lightning hammer and you will be dealing a total of 15 table-wide damage. But where this card gets really crazy is whenever you do combine it with Assassin's Gauntlet. You can just play or blink the Gauntlet, tap down an opponent's entire board, and whenever you now swing with your Mjolnir equipped, you will deal damage equal to the total amount of creatures that player does control. And trust me, if you are playing this into a Krenko deck that has 20 goblins on the battlefield, it will just straight up win you the game. And yet another legendary hammer we are playing is Hammer of Nazan, an equipment that whenever any sort of equipment, including itself, enters a battlefield will allow you to attach it to any creature you control for free, which will allow us to bypass any equip cost we have in the deck, so whenever we now play an equipment we will instantly get it hooked up onto our chain and get some value from it, or whenever we do decide to blink our equipment to get additional cards of our commander, we don't even have to worry about equipping it again, just saving us an incredible amount of mana that we would have to otherwise pay for the equip costs. Now while that effect is already really incredible, whatever creature this card is attached to will also get a +2 power boost and indestructible. So not only is this thing an equip cost cheating engine, it is also a really excellent protection tool to protect either Jane or our value creatures from spot removal and board wipes. Leyline Axe, a 4-mana equipment that will give the equipped creature a +1/+1 stat boost, double strike and trample. And let me tell you, this is just an absolutely deadly mix of keywords in an equipment deck, because whenever you are able to get Jane to a total of 11 power, which by the way is really easy to do in this type of equipment deck, all you need is just to get one hit in and you will instantly take an opponent out of the game on commander damage, while at the same time also allowing you to double up on any sort of combat damage trigger like your Sword of Heart and Home or even your Buster Sword. And just like all of the other leyline enchantments, whenever you do start the game and you have this thing in your opening hand, you get to put it onto the battlefield for free from as early as turn 0. Just making sure that you will have a blink target on the battlefield really early to get card draw of Jane, while at the same time also having one of the most threatening equipments in this entire deck on the battlefield before your opponents even play their first land. Swordsman's Steel, a new equipment we got in the Marvel set that honestly is just an auto-include in whatever equipment deck you decide to build. Whenever this thing enters the battlefield, you get to draw 1 card for each equipment you control, including this card itself. Yeah, I don't think I have to explain how crazy this card is in this deck. Even just casting this card normally, it will draw you about 3 to 4 cards because we will always have a bunch of equipment just lying around on the battlefield. But in this deck we can even use Jane's ability to just blink this card over and over again and you will be drawing like a gazillion cards of it. Just imagine you opening the game with a Bloodforged Battle Axe and creating a ton of copies out of it and then resolving this thing. Now while just that draw ability alone makes this card absolutely cracked in this specific deck, whenever it is equipped to a creature it will even give a +2/+2 stat boost for each equipment you control, which in most cases will just be a +10/+10 stat boost, just allowing you to deal a huge amount of commander damage with Jane, or just grow any of your other creatures into a massive game-ending threat. And the last card in this section, and an equipment everyone knew was gonna be included, is Excalibur, Sword of Eden. It's a massive 12 mana equipment that will have its cost reduced by the total amount of mana value of historic permanents you have on the battlefield. Historic permanents being legendaries, artifacts and sagas. Now let me tell you, with us having Jane, a couple of mana rocks and a couple of artifact equipment on the battlefield, you will always be able to play this card for 0 mana. You will only be able to equip this card to a legendary creature, but you will be able to do so for the low cost of 2 generic mana. And the equipped creature will simply get vigilance and a massive +10/0 stat boost. Yeah, this thing combined with only a small other little equipment will just allow you to instantly swing Jane at an opponent and delete them from the game. Just imagine the crazy amount of damage you'll be dealing whenever you do have an Excalibur and a Leyline Axe attached to a creature. Next up, we have our Blink package. This category is filled with creatures and artifacts that do generate some crazy value whenever they enter the battlefield, which we can even double up whenever we do attack with Jane thanks to her Blink attack trigger. And while obviously Jane is our primary Blink engine, I also included some backup options to blink even more permanents and generate us even more value. Let's start by taking a look at the cards we actually want to blink. Cloud, Midgar Mercenary, a 2-drop creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will give us a free Steel Shaper's Gift. And this ability will just allow you to go fetch up any sort of equipment you need most at the current given board state, either be it a Lava Spur Boots as a haste enabler, a Swordsman's Steel if you do need a card draw option, or even one of the pieces of the Assassin's Gauntlet Mjolnir combo. And just keep in mind, whenever you use either Jane or one of our Blink engines you're about to see and you blink Cloud, you will get this effect over and over again, just making this little 2-drop into a repeatable equipment tutor engine. Now outside of that, Cloud is also a really great equipment carrier thanks to his second ability, because for as long as Cloud is equipped, if an ability of any equipment attached to him would trigger, it will trigger an additional time, making his own favorite sword, Buster Sword, generate you some truly crazy value, generating you an army of Bloodforged Battle Axe tokens, doubling up on both the blink and acceleration effect of your Sword of Heart and Home, and he is a really worthy carrier of Mjolnir because he will double up on its damage trigger. Now since Cloud is this good of a card, he does have a pretty high price. A good budget alternative is Captain America Liberator, which is a 5-drop creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will allow you to go fetch up any sort of equipment with mana value 3 or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. And he also has a nice little ability that will even generate you 1/1 creature tokens whenever you attack with him and he is equipped with something. And a very similar card is Stoneforge Mystic, another 2-drop creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will essentially give us a free Steel Shaper's Gift, just like Cloud, allowing us to go fetch up any sort of equipment from our deck we need most at the current given board state, while also being a fantastic blink target for Jane. Now instead of coming with a crazy double trigger ability, instead for 2 mana and tapping this creature we get to put any sort of equipment card straight from our hand on the battlefield, just allowing us to cheat equipment onto the battlefield for free on instant speed. And especially if you are playing in a pot where a ton of counter magic is being played, whenever you do get equipment onto the battlefield by using this ability, your opponents won't even have a way to counter it. If you do want to keep this deck a little more budget friendly, you can also replace this card with Sun Spider Nimble Webber, which is another creature that on ETB will allow you to tutor up any equipment from your deck, and it even comes on an evasive body. Cryogen Relic, and even though this card isn't an equipment so it won't draw us any cards of Jane's second ability, it is just the perfect card draw blink target, because whenever this artifact either enters or leaves the battlefield, it will allow us to draw a card, already acting as a cantrip whenever you play it. And whenever you now attack with Jane, you can just target this card, it will leave the battlefield drawing you a card, then just re-enter again and you will get to draw another card of it, essentially drawing you 2 cards per Jane trigger. And by paying 2 mana and sacrificing this artifact, you get to put a stun counter on target tapped creature, which I suppose in some scenarios can prevent another Cranko activation or prevent one of your opponent's big creatures from swinging at you. Bespoke Bow, a 3 mana equipment that whenever it enters a battlefield will allow us to pick 1 non-land permanent on the battlefield and return it to its owner's hand. And this ridiculous TMNT equipment is just the perfect fit for what we're trying to do in this deck, because whenever you play it you will already get to draw a card of Jane, and you can use it as a fantastic disruption tool to just bounce any sort of high value creature or commander, or even any sort of problematic enchantments or artifacts like a Grave Pact. And obviously since we will be able to use Jane's blink ability onto this card, we will just get a repeat unbeatable bounce option every single turn that will even draw us a card whenever we blink it. And talking about disrupting our opponent's artifacts and enchantments, we're also playing Lauren of the Third Path, a 3-drop creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will just allow us to pinpoint remove any sort of artifact or enchantment on the battlefield, giving us yet another really solid way to deal with problematic things like Heuristic Study, an Aura Shard, or a Phyrexian Altar that we can just keep blinking over and over again, and it will make it really hard for our opponents to ever stick any sort of valuable permanence on the battlefield. And she also comes with an activated ability that will allow us to tap her and both target opponent and we ourselves will get to draw a card. Now, especially considering that this thing does come with vigilance, you can just attack with her first, and then whenever you want you can just tap her to get a little bit of extra card advantage. And a card with exactly the same ETB ability is a Witch Enchanter, allowing us to pop any sort of enchantment or artifact whenever it does enter the battlefield. And if you don't need its effect, you can just play its backside, which is a land that enters the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. You should really view all of these MDFC land cards as lands first that do have an additional effect whenever you do draw into them later in the game. Herbie Scout Unit, a 4-mana flying creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow us to draw a card and then put any sort of land card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped, making it act as yet another really excellent blink target that will fill our hand even more while even accelerating our mana in the process. Especially considering that with all of the cards we'll be drawing of our commander, we'll always have a bunch of spare lands sitting in our hands and we'll always have targets to put into play. Now you might be wondering why I decided to include this card over the classic option Solemn Simulacrum, and the reason honestly is pretty simple, because Herbie will always net us a card while Solemn Simulacrum actually has to die before we get value from it. And my favorite Azorius card ever printed and probably the best blink target in the entire deck is a Riptide Gearhulk. It's a massive 5-mana 2/5 double strike prowess creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will allow us to pick a non-land permanent for each opponent, and then they will have to put the chosen permanents back into their library third from the top. And let me tell you, the value on this card is just incredible, because whenever it enters, since you get to pick 1 permanent per opponent, it will essentially allow you to deal with 3 problems at once. And it doesn't just return to hand either, they will have to wait another 3 turns before drawing into that card again and being able to cast it. Now, while just regularly casting this card already provides you with some excellent value, just imagine you being able to blink it over and over again with Jane's ability or any of our blink value engines. Anytime you blink it, that's just another 3 problematic permanents gone from the battlefield that your opponents will have to wait a couple of turns before they draw into them again. And the massive 2/5 body and the keywords on this thing are no joke either, because whenever you cast any sort of equipment, artifact, mana rock, or any sort of interaction spell, it will just grow bigger and bigger thanks to the prowess mechanic, which then will allow you to deal massive amounts of damage times 2 thanks to the double strike, also making this thing into the perfect equipment carrier. Solitude, a 5-mana 3/2 flying lifelink body that whenever it enters a battlefield will essentially give you a free Swords to Plowshares, that on a later turn you can just start blinking over and over again, just allowing you to pinpoint remove whatever threats your opponents might have on the battlefield. And the fact that this thing also comes with both flying and lifelink actually makes it into a really great equipment carrier. The flying will just make sure you can actually connect, deal damage, and get some triggers of things like your Sword of Heart and Home. And thanks to the lifelink, whenever you do have any sort of power boosting equipment, you will actually gain a ton of life of this creature. Now, the best thing about this card, and the reason it's this pricey, is the fact that it does come with the evoke mechanic, meaning that instead of paying its mana cost, you can just exile any sort of white card from your hand and you will get to cast it for free. The downside to the evoke mechanic being that whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you will instantly have to sacrifice it. But obviously you will still get its ETB Swords to Plowshares trigger on the stack, basically giving you access to an instant instant speed exile based removal spell that will be really easy to use because we will always have spare white cards in our hand with a huge amount of cards we'll be drawing off chain. Now if you don't want to spend the 35 euros on this card, a good budget alternative is a Skyclave Apparition, which is a 3-drop creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to exile any non-land permanent with mana value 4 or greater, that in return whenever this creature does leave the battlefield will give the controller of the exiled card a creature token, still providing you with a really solid immediate removal option whenever you cast it, that you will even be able to blink to get even more value out of it. And speaking of flying lifelink bodies, Angel of Indemnity. Whenever this beautiful 6-winged body enters the battlefield, we get to pick any permanent in our graveyard with mana value 4 or less and return it to the battlefield. And this thing is just an incredible recursion machine because it works on anything. You can get back any sort of value creature, you can use it to get Jane back from your graveyard to the battlefield just bypassing any sort of commander attacks. Whenever any of your opponents did use artifact removal on any of your equipments, you can just get them back, and even if you don't have any other targets, you can use this ability to get back lands as some sort of an acceleration tool. And this thing also comes with the Encore mechanic, meaning that whenever it is in your graveyard for a total cost of 8 mana, you get to create a haste token copy of this creature for each opponent that's still in the game, and let's just assume that's always gonna be 3. You will then get a total of 3 of its recursion triggers, while at the same time also giving you 3 massive 5/5 flying lifelink bodies to swing at your opponents with, honestly making this card just into a way better version of a Sun Titan thanks to in the late game you being able to use the Encore mechanic. Meteor Sword, the equipment version of a Meteor Golem. It's a 7-cost equipment that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to destroy any permanent. You can use it to deal with any problem that might be on the battlefield, whether that be an artifact, enchantment or creature, and one of my favorite things is that you can even use it on lands like a Field of the Dead or a Valakut. And once you do have a couple of your blink engines set up, you can just make this leave and enter over and over again, and you can just start taking away one specific player's lands, just completely locking them out of the game. And this, by the way, might just be one of the best cards to cheat onto the battlefield by using Stoneforge Mystic's activated ability. Thought Monitors, a 7-mana artifact creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to draw 2 cards. Now while that might sound really horrible, this thing does come with affinity for artifacts, meaning that its cost will be reduced by 1 generic mana for each artifact you control. Yeah, with all of our mana rocks, equipment and even artifact lands, you will always be able to cast this for just 1 blue mana, which will give you an additional flying body to just carry your equipment, allow you to dig 2 cards deeper into your deck for just 1 measly blue mana, and obviously this thing is just a fantastic blink target because whenever you do so you will get to draw an additional 2 cards of it. And the most expensive and most impactful blink target in the entire deck is a Portal to Phyrexia, which is a massive 9 mana artifact that whenever it enters the battlefield will make each opponent sacrifice 3 creatures. Yeah, what should I even say about this card? Whenever this thing enters the battlefield it will already start decimating your opponent's boards, let alone once you start blinking it like 1 or 2 times per turn cycle. I can guarantee you whenever you do have this thing combined with a blink engine on the battlefield, your opponents won't ever be able to make any creatures stick. And as an additional passive ability at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to pick 1 creature in any graveyard and return it to the battlefield on your side of the table as a Phyrexian creature. So the first ability will just make all of your opponent's biggest threats end up in their graveyard, and at the beginning of your upkeep you will get them back for your own use. A decent budget alternative for this card is an Agent of Treachery, which is a 7-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to pick 1 target permanent on the battlefield and you get to gain control of it. Obviously making this into a fantastic blink target because whenever you do so you will just be stealing more and more value, and at the beginning of your end step if you do control 3 or more permanents that you don't own, you even get to draw a massive 3 cards of this dude. Now like I mentioned in the section intro, we're also playing some additional ways to blink our creatures and artifacts, the first one being Philia. Exuberant Shepherd, a 2-mana flash good boy that has a very similar ability to Jane. Whenever Philia attacks, we get to pick up to one target creature or artifact on the battlefield and it will leave and then re-enter at the end of turn, just allowing us to get an additional layer of blinking during any of our combat steps, which will allow us to either blink equipment to get additional cards of Jane, or just to get another use out of any impactful ETB ability like a Riptide Gearhulk. And a really nice thing that most people forget about is that you can also use this blink ability on your opponent's permanents, making it really easy to just remove any of their blockers, making sure you can actually get a hit in Witch or Jane for commander damage. And now that we're talking about cute animals that blink, we're also playing a Displacer Kitten, which is a 4-mana cat that whenever we cast any sort of non-creature spell will allow us to pick any non-land permanent we control and then blink it. And let me tell you, this thing is just stupid, and it's probably one of the best blink engines ever printed. We'll get to blink whenever we cast any sort of cheap equipment spell, any sort of counter magic, or even whenever we cast any of our own protection spells to protect our board with, making it really easy to get like an additional 3 to 4 blink triggers every single turn. And just imagine you then having a Riptide Gearhulk, a Cloud, or even a Meteor Sword on the battlefield to target those triggers at. Now, since this card is absolutely busted and it is an auto-include in any sort of ETB value deck, it is quite pricey. A good budget alternative is Yorion, Sky Nomad, a massive flying creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to pick any number of non-land permanents you control, exile them, and they will return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step, just allowing you to pick up your entire board of value ETB creatures, Jane, and all of your equipment. Everything will then re-enter at the same time, which will draw you like 10 cards of Jane, trigger all of your ETB effects like a Riptide Gearhulk and a Lauren, and it will even allow you to untap your entire board, just making sure that you do have some blockers available. Now, talking about creatures that do allow us to blink our entire board, I did actually decide to include one of those into our main deck. Silver Surfer, Cosmic Voyager. And while this thing does have exactly the same ability as Yorion, just allowing us to pick up our entire board and make it re-enter at the end of turn, there is actually one specific word on this card that does make it into a better creature, and that is the flash keyword. Because whenever an opponent is now either casting a board wipe or an overloaded Vandal Blast, you can just flash in your Silver Surfer, just exile everything, the wipe will then resolve, and at the end of turn everything will just return to the battlefield and nothing will be destroyed, while obviously at the same time also re-triggering all of your ETB effects and drawing you a huge amount of cards of Jane, seeing all of your equipment entering again. And the last card in this section is a Hide on the Ceiling, which for 1 blue mana plus X on instant speed will allow you to pick up X amount of artifacts or creatures, exile them, and they will then return at the end of turn. And this thing is basically the improved new version of a Ghostly Flicker, because the mana cost is just exactly the same if you only use it on 2 permanents. The ceiling is just way higher because you can decide to invest even more mana for more targets. And just like I mentioned with Silver Surfer, since the permanents don't return to the battlefield instantly, you can even use this as a sort of protection tool against any sort of spot removal or board wipes. And keep in mind, you can even use this effect on any of your opponent's permanents to just disrupt whatever combo they're going for. Before we continue, I want to give a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members. These decks and videos really are passion projects for me, and that amount of passion does take a lot of time. From researching new cards and making sure that every new deck is as powerful and as synergistic as possible, to recording and editing these videos, and of course the hardest part about deck building that we all know, making those last final 5 cuts. There is always a lot going on behind the scenes to produce these videos. So seeing so many of you enjoying these videos so much that you actually decide to support the channel really means the world to me. None of this would be possible without your support, and I am forever grateful for that. So if you want to support the channel for yourself, see what commander project I'm currently working on weeks before the videos even go live, or you just want that awesome Panzer helmet next to your name in the comments on YouTube, you can always come check it out by clicking the big join button button below the video. Next up, we have our Synergies and Payoffs. Now by themselves, our equipment and our blink packages are already incredibly powerful, but this section is where the deck really starts coming together. They either give us additional rewards for playing equipment, open up some additional synergies that we otherwise wouldn't have access to, or even give us additional ways to close out a game without even having to swing with Jane. Steel Shaper's Gift, a card I mentioned when I was talking about Stoneforge Mystic and Cloud. Now even though unlike those cards this is just a one-time effect and it doesn't come attached to a blinkable creature body, this card basically allows us to play a 98 card deck, because you can essentially view this as some sort of a wild card for 1 mana that does count as any equipment in the deck. You can use it to go fetch up your Mjolnir Gauntlet combo, your Bespoke Bow if you do want to bounce a problematic permanent, or even any of the protection pieces you will see in a later section. Sigarda's 8, a 1 mana enchantment that will allow us to cast any equipment spell on instant speed, which is actually an incredible tool in the type of control shell that we're playing, because when we have this on the battlefield we can just pass the turn and leave all of our mana open to use any sort of instant speed board wipe or counter spell, and at the end step of the last opponent's turn, if we didn't need any of that mana, we can just start flashing in all of our equipment and advancing our own board. And its second passive ability functions in exactly the same way as a Hammer of Nazan. Whenever any equipment enters the battlefield under our control, we get to automatically equip it to any of our creatures for free. Yeah, this thing does provide you with some incredible value for just 1 white mana. Sram, Senior Edificer, a classic card draw engine for any sort of equipment or aura deck. Whenever we cast any equipment, we get to draw a card of it. Now while this ability obviously isn't as good as Jane because she triggers on ETB and not on cast, just having access to an additional consistent stream of card draw will just make sure that you'll always have a total of 7 cards in your hand in this deck. And talking about equipment based card draw engines, Pure Steel Paladin. And this time it does come with exactly the same ability as Jane that will draw you a card whenever an equipment enters. Whenever we cast it, whenever we blink it, or even whenever we start generating token copies with our Bloodforged Battle Axe. And this dude doesn't stop there, because once we do have the Metalcraft ability active, meaning we have to control like 3 or more artifacts, which in this deck we will always do, all of our equip costs are reduced to 0 mana. Like I told you at the beginning of the video, you don't ever have to worry about equip costs, because between this card, Sigarda's 8 and Hammer of Nazan, you will always be able to bypass them. Forge Anew, a 3 mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to pick 1 equipment card in your graveyard and return it straight to the battlefield, giving us a really nice recursion tool to just get back whatever equipments that our opponents did manage to destroy. And if you for example do manage to discard a Meteor Sword down to hand size, you will be able to get it into play for just 3 mana. Its second ability will during our turn allow us to activate any sort of equipment on instant speed, actively allowing us to shuffle our equipment around whenever we want, which honestly will make it incredibly hard for your opponents to efficiently block your creatures. Because let's say you do have 2 creatures on the battlefield and an opponent has 1 blocker. You can just put your entire stack of value equipment on creature 1, then swing with both of your creatures. Obviously your opponent will block the equipped creature, then after blockers have been declared you can just shuffle all your equipment to the non-block creature and you will still be able to get a massive amount of damage in and get all of your combat damage triggers out of it. And the third ability on this card will reduce the equip cost of the first equipment you equip during your turn to 0 mana, providing you with yet another additional way to cheat equip without paying any mana. Simulacrum Synthesizer, a 3 mana artifact that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to scry to, just setting up your draws for your next turn. And whenever any other artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you will get to generate a Construct token whose power and toughness will be equal to the total amount of artifacts you control. And let me tell you, this is just one of the craziest artifacts they ever printed. The value on this thing is is just nuts. Because any equipment you now play with mana value 3 or greater will generate you one of these construct tokens, which will have a massive stat line thanks to us controlling this many artifacts. And obviously this thing just goes absolutely nuts whenever you do combine it with Jane or any of our Blink engines. You can just start flickering your artifacts in and out, and anytime you do so, you will get a game-ending construct that will just keep getting bigger and bigger with each construct you generate. And honestly, even though Jane is our main win con, just equipping her with a bunch of power boosters and swinging for commander damage, I honestly think that this card is an even better and more efficient win condition. Because just having one of these 2020 tokens on the battlefield is already a crazy threat. In this deck it's just so incredibly easy to generate an entire army of them, and you will have like a total of 500 power on the board, and it won't even be all that hard to achieve it. Now, while I'd really recommend you getting a copy of this card because it's just that potent, if you do want to save a little bit of money, you can replace it with a 1000 Moon Smithy, which is a 4 mana artifact that whenever it enters will generate you one of these construct tokens, meaning you can just blink it over and over again and slowly start amassing your army. But in reality, this card doesn't even come close to the sheer efficiency of a Simulacrum synthesizer. And now that we're talking about these construct tokens, we also have the big daddy of them, Urza, Lord High Artificer. And if you are playing any sort of artifact deck and you are in blue colors, there's no reason to not play this dude. Whenever he enters the battlefield, he will already generate you a construct token, which in this deck is even more valuable because we do have so many ways to just make him leave and enter again, just generating us an entire army of robots. But what makes Urza into a truly broken card is its second ability that will allow us to tap any artifact we control to add 1 blue mana to our mana pool. And let me tell you, once you do have Urza on the battlefield, mana won't ever be an issue anymore, because you will be able to tap all of your equipment for blue mana even though they're already attached to any of your creatures. You'll be able to turn all of your utility artifacts like a Cryogen Relic and a Herbie Scout unit into mana rocks. And of course, you will be able to tap Urza's own construct tokens for mana. And if those two absolutely insane abilities aren't enough yet, he also comes with an activated ability for 5 generic mana, which will make you shuffle your library, then reveal the top card, and you get to play that card without paying its mana cost. So with all of the mana you'll be able to produce with his second ability, he even comes with an own mana outlet you can just dump all of that mana into, which will just allow you to cheat a huge part of your deck straight onto the battlefield by repeatedly using it. Phyrexian Metamorph, an artifact creature we can cast for 3 generic mana and 2 life, and it will enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield. And this thing will just allow you to get another copy of whatever value cards you already have on the battlefield. Be that turning this thing into another copy of your Buster Sword because it isn't legendary, making this thing enter as another copy of Riptide Gearhulk, which will in fact give you the ETP trigger, or just imagine you copying your Simulacrum synthesizer with this thing and just getting double the construct token output. Oh, and I suppose if any of your opponents do have a big threat on the battlefield like an Itali or an Elesh Norn, you can use this card on those to gain their effects. Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. And this really is one of my personal favorite cards. I mean, just look at the art on this thing, it's absolutely beautiful. Now first up, if a permanent entering the battlefield would trigger an ability of any permanent we control, it will trigger an additional time. Yeah, just doubling up on our Riptide Gearhulk trigger, allowing us to bounce 2 things with our Bespoke Bow, doubling up on the removal of our Solitude, making each opponent sacrifice a total of 6 creatures with Portal to Phyrexia, and most importantly allowing us to draw 2 cards from Jane whenever an equipment enters. This thing is honestly just the perfect fit for what we're trying to do in this ETB and Blink heavy deck. But the best thing about Elesh is that she doesn't only double up our own value, because she also comes with the effect that permanents entering the battlefield don't cause any of her opponent's abilities to trigger, which is just an absolutely insane disruption tool that can can shut down many decks. Landfall players won't get any value from their Field of the Dead, their Skewed Swarm or their Valakut. Token players won't be able to take you out of the game with their Purgifigos or their Impact Tremors, and even little things like a Wood Elf's fetching a land won't work anymore. Now a pretty good budget alternative for Elesh is a Starfield Vocalist, which will also double up on all of your ETB triggers, and he also comes with a warp ability for just 2 mana. So if you know you're about to get a ton of triggers during a turn, just warp this in first, double up on all of your value, and you will just be able to cast them again from exile on a later turn. And the last card in this section is Kappa Cannoneer, another very simple yet very potent alternate win condition for this deck. It's a 6 mana creature with the improvise mechanic, meaning that we can tap any artifact we control to reduce its generic mana cost by 1. Now usually by just tapping down all of the equipment we control, we will be able to get this dude on the battlefield for just 1 blue mana. And whenever any artifact enters a battlefield under our control, we get to put a +1/+1 counter onto this guy, and he will be unblockable until the end of turn, just making him scale bigger and bigger over the course of the game with any sort of artifact we are either playing or blinking. And since it will be a massive unblockable body, he is an excellent equipment carrier for things like a Buster Sword or a Sword of Heart and Home. And you'd actually be surprised of how brutal Ward 4 can actually be, because if an opponent is trying to target this thing with an Assassin's Trophy, they will now have to pay a total of 6 mana for it. Next up we have our Acceleration. Now despite Jane only costing us 3 mana, we do want to get ahead on the curve from as early as possible, just to allow us to deploy multiple equipment in a single turn, keeping mana open for any of our interaction or protection spells, and to cast some of our more expensive cards in the deck way earlier than we should. Paradise Mantle. It's a 0 mana equipment, meaning that whenever we do have Jane on the battlefield, we can just play it for free, and just like a Detection Probe, it will replace itself by drawing you a card. And by paying 1 generic mana, we get to equip this card to a creature, and we will be able to tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, essentially allowing us to turn Sram or our Pure Steel Paladin into a Birds of Paradise. And of course, we're also playing a Sol Ring, which is by far the most mana efficient mana rock ever printed, just helping us to play even more equipment in a turn, pay for any sort of equip costs, or get our big hitters like a Portal to Phyrexia onto the battlefield 2 turns earlier. Arcane Signet, a classic 2 mana rock that will tap for 1 mana of any color, which will just accelerate our tempo by 1 turn, while at the same time also helping us out with color fixing, which might be really nice for things like a Riptide Gearhulk that do have a ton of colored pips in their mana cost. Thought Vessel, a 2 mana rock that will tap for 1 colorless mana, and passively it will make it so that we don't have a maximum hand size. And while I'm usually of the opinion that this card is some sort of a casual trap and you barely need it in any decks, with the massive amount of cards we'll be drawing of Jane and things like a Swordsman's Steel, this ability is actually quite useful in this deck. Now as you all know, since we got the first Spider-Man set, they started releasing these Infinity Stones that are just some really valuable 2 mana rocks. We didn't get the blue one yet, but the white one is just perfect for this deck, because if you do get to the later stages of the game and you are able to invest 6 mana into this card, it will turn into a free teleportation circle that at the beginning of your end step will allow you to pick up any non-land permanent you control and then just blink it. Yeah, in the early game it's just a solid 2 mana rock that in the late game has an incredible benefit to it. Now if you don't want to spend a bunch of money on this piss colored stone, you can totally replace it with a classic Azorius Signet that has exactly the same function in the early game. Gold Pan. For 2 mana you get an equipment that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate you a treasure token. So not only will this thing accelerate your mana from as early as turn 2, once you do have Jane on the battlefield you can just start blinking it, and every time you do so you will get to generate an additional treasure, and you will even get to draw a card whenever you do so, making this stupid Gold Pan into one of the most valuable valuable blink targets in the entire deck. Knight of the White Orchid, a classic double white creature that whenever it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you do, you get to search your library for a Plains card and put it onto the battlefield. It doesn't even enter tapped. And the only thing you need to get value from this card from as early as turn 2 is just not be the player who goes first in the game, because that way all of your opponents will control at least one more land than you do. And later in the game you can actually start blinking this creature with Jane, and if an opponent went crazy by playing acceleration tools like a Farseek, a Cultivate or a Kodama's Reach, you will be able to get even more acceleration of this guy. And talking about fetching lands, we're also playing a Sword of the Animist, which is a 2-mana equipment you can equip for 2 mana, and whenever the equipped creature does attack, you get to fetch a basic land from your deck and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And this is just a crazy acceleration effect that can make it so that you accelerate even faster than any green player at the table while you are in Azorius colors, allowing us to have like 10 lands on the battlefield by turn 6 without even having access to green. Sit. Free Flyer Pilot, a 2-drop creature that will passively reduce the cost of any equipment you play by 1 generic mana. And with us playing a total of 22 equipments in this deck, don't underestimate how potent this effect can be. It even allows you to set up for some crazy storm value turns whenever you do have Jane on the battlefield. Just play an equipment for barely any mana, draw a new card of Jane. If the drawn card is another equipment, you can just keep going until you run out of mana, and you will have dug really deep into your library and gained a ton of value out of Sit's cost reduction. Sit also comes with a jump ability, meaning that during our turn he will have flying, actually making him into a pretty decent equipment carrier. And while his 2 first abilities alone are already more than enough reason to include him in the deck, he also comes with an activated ability that for 2 generic mana and tapping him, we get to pick any equipment from our graveyard and return it to our hand, just giving us access to yet another recursion option on top of our Forge Anew and our Angel of Indemnity. And the last card in this section, and another card from the Marvel set, is Shuri, Wakandan Inventor. She's a 2-drop legendary creature that passively will reduce the cost of any artifact spell we cast by 1 generic mana. So unlike Sit, this won't only apply to our equipments, but also to all of our mana rocks, other small value artifacts, and we will even be able to get our portal to Phyrexia onto the battlefield 1 turn earlier. And she also comes with a really cool activated ability that for 1 generic mana and tapping her will allow us to pick 2 artifacts we control, and artifact 1 will turn into a copy of artifact 2, except it isn't legendary. And you can do some absolutely crazy things with this. You can transform one of your treasure tokens into an additional construct and just hit your opponents for a gazillion damage. You can transform your gold pan into a copy of a simulacrum synthesizer, then start spamming equipment and generate an entire army of construct tokens. If you have a Paradise Mantle and a Mjolnir attached to your Jane Foster, you can just turn the Paradise Mantle into a second copy of Mjolnir, because the copy isn't legendary and turning Paradise Mantle into a copy of Mjolnir won't even cause it to fall off. Or you can use it to transform anything into a second Kappa Cannoneer, start spamming artifacts and swing at your opponents for a huge amount of unblockable damage. Next up, we have the protection and the interaction. All of the value we generate doesn't really mean all that much if we can't keep Jane or our arsenal of growing equipment on the battlefield. Good thing for us that Azorius colors do give us access to some of the best interaction and protection tools available in the Commander format. Whether that's really efficient removal or counter spells, board wipes, or equipment that will make it nearly impossible to get Jane off the battlefield, the cards in this category make sure that our engine can be disrupted while also giving us tools to disrupt whatever our opponents are doing. Commander's Plate, a 1-mana equipment that will act as a really solid cantrip and that we can equip to Jane for the low cost of 3 mana that will give her a +3/+3 stat boost and protection from any color she's not in, meaning that she'll get protection from green, which is really relevant because your opponents won't be able to block her with any sort of reach creature, and she will also gain protection from red and black, which tend to be the colors where the most spot removal is printed in. Your opponents won't be able to target her with a Dreadbore, a deadly relic, or even deal damage to her with the effect of a blasphemous act. Now, since this is a pretty potent card, it is quite pricey, and a good budget alternative for this card is a Champion's Helm, which is a 3-mana equipment you can equip for just 1 mana that will give a +2/+2 stat boost to the creature, and it will also give it hexproof if it's legendary. Dragonfire Blade, another really solid 1-mana cantrip when combined with Jane that you can equip to her for just 2 mana because the equip cost will be reduced by 1 mana for each color of the permanent it's going to get equipped on. And when it is equipped, it will give a +2/+2 stat boost and hexproof from monocolored, which is honestly way better than it sounds because most spot removal spells tend to be monocolored, be it a Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares, a Beast Within, a Doomblade, a Rapid Hybridization, or even a Chaos Warp. Galadriel's Dismissal, a 1-mana instant speed spell we can use to make target creature phase out, meaning that it won't exist and can be targeted until our next upkeep. And the phase out mechanic is actually really incredible for equipment decks because whenever you do phase a creature out, it will also phase out all the equipment attached to it, and whenever it phases back in, it will still be attached, giving you a really solid way to protect your commander or any value creature from any sort of spot removal or board wipe. And even if an opponent is casting an overloaded Vandal Blast and you do have like 5 equipments attached to Jane, you can just phase her out together with the entire pile of equipment she had on her. The Vandal Blast will resolve, nothing will be destroyed, and at the beginning of your next upkeep she will just be right back. And since this thing also has kicker, whenever you do cast it for a total of 4 mana, you get to phase out every creature target player controls, which you can use to just save your entire board, or you can even use on an opponent whenever they are going for a lethal swing at you or whenever they are setting up an infinite combo based with their creatures. Now, even though this card will get a reprint in the Hobbit set, the price will always remain really high. A good budget alternative is a Slip Out the Back, which is just a 1-mana spell that will allow you to phase out one specific creature and it will re-enter with a +1/+1 counter on itself. And a very similar card is March of Swirling Mist, that for 1 blue mana +X will allow you to phase out X target creatures. So baseline, by just casting this for a total of 2 mana, you get to phase out your Jane and just save her and all of the equipment that you attach to her. But it also comes with an additional ability that will allow you to exile any number of blue cards from your hand whenever you cast this, and its cost will be reduced by 2 generic mana for each card you did that with, just allowing you to save even more creatures on your board or use it in the same way as a Kick Galadriel's Dismissal to just make all of your opponent's creatures disappear until their next upkeep. And since we will be drawing this many cards of Jane's ability, we will always have spare blue cards in our hand to actually pitch to this effect. Swords to Plowshares. For 1 mana, on instant speed, we get to exile any creature on the battlefield and the controller will gain life equal to that creature's power. Now, while this isn't repeatable removal attached to a blinkable creature body, this is simply one of the most mana efficient removal options ever printed. If you know an opponent is about to swing for a lethal amount of damage or they are setting up some really valuable creatures on their board for a combo, you can just leave 1 mana open and swords away your problem. An offer you can't refuse. For 1 mana, we get to counter target non-creature spell and the controller of that spell will get to generate 2 treasure tokens. Now, since we're playing this many equipment cards, will always have a solid amount of stats on the board, and the only real weakness of this deck are non-creature spells, be it crazy enchantments like an Aura Shards, board wipes, an overloaded Vandal Blast, or even our biggest nightmare, a Farewell. And this card just allows us to deal with any of those problems for just 1 mana. Dovin's Veto. This thing is basically the Azorius improved version of a classic negate. For 2 mana, you get to counter any non-creature spell, and this spell can be countered, making this into a really solid disruption tool that is even better if you are playing in pots where a ton of counter magic is being played, because your opponents won't be able to stop this. 3 steps ahead. A card with a spree mechanic from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set, meaning that whenever we cast it, we get to pay for any of its modes, and any mode we paid for will apply. The first mode for a total of 3 mana will make it function as a classic counter spell, allowing us to counter anything that's on the stack, even creatures. The second mode for a total of 4 mana will allow us to pick any creature or artifact we control and create a token copy of it, which is just fantastic to use on things like a Simulacrum Synthesizer, a Sword of Heart and Home, or even a Buster Sword. And the third and final mode will allow us to draw 2 cards and then discard a card, allowing us to dig a little deeper into our library while also giving us the opportunity to discard big things into our graveyard we can get back later with our Angel of Indemnity. And what I like most about the spree mechanic is that by investing even more mana, you get to pick any combination of these things. Since we are a control deck and we are planning to go really late into the game, usually this thing will function as a counterspell to disrupt your opponents while even advancing your own board by allowing you to copy any of your artifacts. Robe of Stars, a 2 mana equipment we can equip for just 1 mana that will give the equipped creature +3 toughness, and it also comes with an activated ability we can activate for just 2 mana on instant speed that will make the equipped creature phase out. And let me tell you, this thing makes it nearly impossible for your opponents to ever get Jane off the battlefield. They cast a board wipe, just pay 2 mana and Jane and all of your equipment will be perfectly safe. They cast some spot removal, just pay 2 mana and save Jane. An opponent is casting an overloaded Vandal Blast and you have 4 equipments on your Jane, just pay 2 mana, phase her out and nothing will even happen. Mythical Code, a 3 mana, flash, indestructible legendary equipment that whenever it enters a battlefield will auto-equip to any legendary creature you control. Now by itself, this thing is just an excellent instant speed protection tool for your commander because you can just leave 3 mana open, and whenever an opponent is trying to disrupt your chain, you can just flash this in, auto-equip, and she will survive. But where it gets even better is that since this thing auto-equips, you can just blink it over and over with your Jane or any other blink value engine, making it function as some sort of blink fodder that will make sure you always have a target to blink to get draw of Jane's ability. Oh, and by the way, since this thing has indestructible itself, it will be incredibly hard for your opponents to ever get this off the board, and even if they did manage to get rid of Jane, whenever you now recast her again from the command zone, she will instantly gain this equipment and get indestructible. It's a pretty expensive equipment that you can replace with a new card we got in the Marvel set, Unstable Molecule Suit, which is a 3 mana equipment you can equip for 2 mana to your commander and it will give it +2/2 and indestructible. Now while it's nowhere near as efficient as a Mythical Code because it doesn't auto-equip, it will save you a bunch of money. And of course, since we are a heavy control deck, we're also playing our own share of board wipes. The first one being a Final Showdown, another card with a spree mechanic. And let's start by taking a look at its last mode, which for a total of 6 mana will make it function as an instant speed board wipe, which trust me are pretty rare in the format and no one will ever expect this. You can just leave all of your mana open, and whenever you see your opponents are doing some crazy things on their side of the table, just play this card on instant speed and reset whatever they are doing. By paying a total of 2 mana and going for its first mode, it will give any creature on the board indestructible until the end of turn on instant speed, giving us access to yet another really awesome tool to protect Jane or any of our other value creatures. And its first mode for a total of 2 mana will make all creatures on the battlefield lose all of their abilities. And this thing can just totally stop your opponents from winning the game for just 2 mana. Their Weftstalker Ardent won't deal table-wide damage anymore whenever they are creating a gazillion tokens. You can use this to prevent a Sephiroth from just draining out the table with a sacrifice loop, or even whenever your opponent is going for a classic Kiki Jiki Pestermite combo, this thing will prevent that from winning the game. And the coolest thing is that whenever you cast this for a total of 7 mana, you can just make your Jane indestructible and then wipe all of the other creatures off the board. Fated Clash, a really awesome board wipe I honestly had never even seen before making this video. For 5 mana you get to pick 1 creature you control and 1 creature an opponent controls. Both of them will gain indestructible until the end of turn. And after that has happened, this spell will destroy all creatures. Now honestly, the fact that you do get get this effect for the low cost of 5 mana is pretty nuts. Because whenever you do control your Jane stacked with a bunch of equipment and a huge stat line, you can then just pick your opponent's Elvish Mystic and Jane, wipe the entire board of any creatures. You will then first be able to get a free hit in on their life totals, which usually will take them out of the game on commander damage. And of course, since all of your opponent's creatures just got destroyed, you have set them back into the Stone Age and they will have to rebuild their entire board. And the last, but probably the most efficient board wipe in the deck is an Avatar's Wrath. For 4 mana we get to pick one target creature and then airbend any other creature on the battlefield, meaning that they will get exiled, and for as long as they remain exiled, their controllers will be able to recast them for just 2 generic mana. And I'll just try to explain to you how crazy this card really is. First up, you can just pick your Jane as a target with a ton of equipment on her and then exile all other creatures on the field. This will allow you to get a free swing in with her and usually take an opponent out of the game on commander damage. Now another really awesome thing is that airbending our own creatures actually is a really good thing for us. Because let's say you have a Witch Enchanter, a Cloud, or a Riptide Gearhulk on your side of the battlefield. You will just be able to recast them again for just 2 generic mana and get another use of any ETB ability that they have, sort of allowing us to pseudo blink them. Now the best part about this card is that it also states that until the end of your next turn, your opponents aren't able to cast spells from anywhere other than their hand, meaning that on the next turn cycle they won't be able to airbend their creatures back in and they will be stuck in exile for an entire turn cycle, just buying you incredible amounts of time to advance your board. And finally we have our mana base. Since this is a 2-color deck with a relatively low curve, we did have the option to include a bunch of utility lands that do synergize perfectly with our strategy. So let's start by taking a look at those. Academy Ruins, a legendary land that for 2 mana and tapping it will allow us to pick any artifact card from our graveyard and put it back on top of our library, giving us access to yet a really solid recursion tool on something as simple as a land to just get back any sort of value equipment that got milled, destroyed, or discarded over the course of the game. Adagia, Windswept Bastion, the white planet card from the Edge of Eternity set that will enter the battlefield tapped and has the station mechanic, meaning we can tap any creature we control to add charge counters onto this card equal to the tapped creature's power. And once this thing has 12 or more charge counters, we do get access to its activated ability, that for 4 mana and tapping it will allow us to create a copy out of any sort of enchantment or artifact we control, but the copy will be legendary. And this is just a really solid option you can use in the late game to get another copy of your Simulacrum Synthesizer on the battlefield and just take over the game, or to just get another copy of your Sword of Hearth and Home or your Buster Sword on the battlefield you can start generating value with. And getting this thing to its 12 station counters honestly isn't all that hard to do in this deck. Usually the only thing you need is 1 construct token generated by Simulacrum Synthesizer or Urza on the battlefield, and since we'll always control this many artifacts, you will only need to tap it once and it will get a huge amount of station counters, allowing you to use its ability. Archway of Innovation. For 1 blue mana and tapping this land, we get to give the next spell we cast the Improvise mechanic, meaning we can tap any artifact we control to reduce its generic mana cost by 1. Yeah, we'll always be having a bunch of equipment sitting on the battlefield that this land will allow us to use as some sort of mana rocks, making it really easy to just dump all of the equipment we have in our hand on the battlefield and draw a bunch of cards of Jane, or it will even allow us to get our Portal to Phyrexia on the battlefield for barely any mana. And I'll just repeat it once again, even if your equipment is attached to a creature, you can still tap it to use the Improvise mechanic and it won't even de-attach. Inventor's Fair. For 4 mana, tapping and sacrificing this land, we get to search our library for any artifact card and put it into our hand. You can only activate this ability if you do control at least 3 artifacts, which in this deck will always be the case, giving us a really easy way to go tutor up our Gauntlet Mjolnir combo, a Simulacrum Synthesizer as a win con to close out the game with, or even later in the game your Portal to Phyrexia once you do have some blink engines established. Secluded Starforge. For 2 mana, tapping this land and X artifacts, we get to give target creature a +X0 stat boost until the end of turn. And this thing will make it incredibly easy to just give an additional stat boost to Jane and take out opponents on commander damage. You can just activate this, tap all equipment attached to Jane and any other spare equipment you have laying around. She will then receive a +10 stat boost, and if your opponents don't have any flying blockers, they will just immediately be taken out of the game by her. Talon Gates of Madara. A land that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to phase out one creature on the battlefield. Now first up, you can just drop this land whenever you do see that an opponent has a problematic creature on the battlefield. You can make Krenko disappear until it's your turn again, remove Akalia before she even gets to attack, or even take the Blood Artist away from any sort of aristocrat player. And the best thing about this land is that for 4 generic mana you get to put it straight from your hand onto the battlefield on instant speed, meaning that later in the game, whenever you do have your Jane on the battlefield and an opponent is casting a wipe or a spot removal spell, you can just pay 4 mana, activate the ability on this land, put it onto the battlefield on instant speed as a response, phase out your Jane, and she will be absolutely fine at the beginning of your next upkeep. The Mycosynth Gardens. By paying X generic mana, we get to turn it into a copy of any sort of non-token artifact we control. And just like I explained with Adagia, this is just the perfect way to get another copy of your Simulacrum Synthesizer or any of your non-legendary equipments that you can equip onto Jane that do have combat triggers like your Sword of Heart and Home and your Buster Sword. And also do note that this effect doesn't state until the end of turn. So if you do decide to turn it into a Simulacrum Synthesizer, it will stay a copy forever. Tyrite Sanctum, a land that for 4 mana, tapping and sacrificing it will allow us to put an indestructibility counter on target god we control. And while in most decks this is a pretty bad effect because you have to activate the first ability first to turn something into a god and then use the last ability, thanks to Jane Foster actually having the god type, you will be able to use the last ability immediately, giving you an additional really solid layer of protection on something as simple as a land. Urza's Saga, a really incredible enchantment saga land. Whenever it enters with 1 lore counter, it will just gain the ability that you can tap it for a colorless mana. Then on the next turn it will go to its second stage that will give you the ability to invest 2 mana, tap this land and generate you one of those construct tokens that we talked about. Now obviously you won't be using this effect early in the game, but if you do drop this land on a later turn, it will give you an incredible amount of stats on the board. And the third and final stage, and the reason why this card is this popular, is that you get to search your library for any sort of artifact card with mana value 0 or 1, and then you just get to put it straight onto the battlefield. And in this deck we actually do have some really solid targets for it. Be it your Paradise Mantle, your Soul Ring, your Bloodforged Battle Axe, a Commander's Plate or a Dragonfire Blade, or even your Lava Spur Boots as a haste enabler. And while the effect on this land is just absolutely incredible, if you don't want to spend the money on this, you can just replace it with a basic Plains. And since we're playing the White Planet card, we're also playing the blue one, Utros Titanic Godcore, which just like I mentioned is really easy to get to 12 charge counters once you do have one of your construct tokens on the battlefield. And once you do so, this thing basically turns into a Tolarian Academy that you can tap by paying 1 mana, and it will add 1 blue mana to your mana pool for each artifact you control. Yeah, once this thing is active, mana won't ever be a problem anymore, especially considering that by the time you get this thing active you will have like 15 to 20 artifacts on the battlefield. And for the regular mana producing lands, we're playing 2 of the artifact lands, a Pain land, a Command Tower, a Slow land, a Verge land, a Check land, a Gleaming Bastion, a Shock land, a Fetch land, the Azorius Pathway, a Filter land, Otawaga Soaring City, a Plaza of Heroes, a Reliquary Tower to make sure we don't have to discard down to hand size once we drew a gazillion cards of Jane's ability, a Nimbus Maze, a Bond land, and for basics we're playing 5 Plains and 4 Forests. And that's it for my take on the mighty Thor, Jane Foster. And I'm gonna be honest, I completely scrolled past this commander once I did take my first look at the Marvel set. As someone who normally isn't a fan of Voltron or equipment decks, I can assure you that Jane totally changed my view of what an equipment deck can look like. Instead of just wanting to make one big creature and turn it sideways every turn, this deck really requires you to think ahead. Every combat step will give you new decisions, every blink target opens up a new line of play, and every piece of equipment becomes another source of value instead of just a regular stat boost. It really is one of the coolest, most interactive, and definitely most unique control decks that I've ever played. As always, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, let me know by dropping a hammer emoji in the comments below. And while you're there, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss next week's video. Anyways, thanks for watching, enjoy hammering your opponents with Mjolnir, and I will see you in the next one.